Hey y'all, this is Byron. Just want to put something out there. Yes, I am a mental health therapist, and yes, my couch is quite comfortable. However, if you're listening to this podcast, it is not a substitute for a therapeutic relationship with a certified or licensed mental health therapist. So, though I appreciate you taking the time out to listening to me and hopefully gain some information and insight about what's going on with you from listening to this podcast, take the time to seek out mental health resources in your area if you so need to. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoy.
Just give your company, don't act impatiently. You'll get where you need to be in due time. Even when things are slow, hold on and don't let go. I'll give you what I owe in due time.
Check it. When that nigga be thinking of cruising, a raise cap it to the side. Thinking the police gon' pull me over with this herb off in my ride. So I had to brick of weed under the armrest, under the leather. And thinking of starting the ways to make my life a little bit better than the dope peddler.
Oh, what's going on, everybody? I'd like to welcome you on back to the Captain's Couch for your next session. I'm your host, Byron Taylor. Thank you, everyone, so much for the positive feedback, the words of encouragement, the phone calls, the tweets, the text messages. This was a lot for me to decide to try to do, and I'm thankful that it was well received and gives me the courage to continue to go out and try to do this. Of course, like I said, I am your host, Byron Taylor. Welcome you guys back to the Captain's Couch. First things first, we'll get a few shout outs after the first episode. Shout out very much, big time to my homie, Jennifer over there at the Gourmet Goober podcast. I was the first person to actually like the podcast on Anchor and wanted me to send a shout out her way. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks for the support over the past couple of years, especially in the Bike Out Tips group. Shout out to Asterisk History. Check out Asterisk History. Definitely I've been enjoying listening to Jay and Alex talk about women that are less featured in history but have played very important roles. I think the last episode, I have to look up the lady's name real quick. Let's see, what was her name? She was really dope, and I enjoyed listening to the episode. Mary Church Terrell, which I thought was dope, and I liked Jay talking to Alex about, hey, so this woman wasn't a Zeta. To which Alex was like, I mean, not every black woman I do is a Zeta, but some of them just are fortunate enough to be Zetas. So I really enjoy listening to them talk to you every week about history and women of history. It's like a nice little storytelling about historical figures that you didn't really know, but deserved way more shine than they probably got in their time or even since then. Also, special shout outs to the big homie Dago for hooking me up with this cool cover art for the podcast. Space Wakanda all day long. Speaking of which, Space Wakanda, shout out to Monique and Wound God, Gaming and Then Some, for the constant support and encouragement to put this thing out here and give this a shot. Also, the intro and outro were chopped down and edited by Aaron Rand Freeman out there at Unreasonable Fridays. Check the big homie out. Him, Bacon, and Dasha, and the Jailer do awesome content over there, ranging from sex talk to current events, pop culture, and gaming. Shout out to them. Of course, check Wound God out at Gaming and Then Some podcast. Sterling has been a big supporter of mine, and one of the people I've definitely developed a real strong bond with over the past couple of years through playing Destiny and gaming. Of course, with him, with Dago, with Aaron, the homies over at Black Astronauts, some more of the crew from Space Wakanda, Malcolm, the homie Joe. Destiny provided a safe haven and a good mental health space for me that I didn't know that I needed when I joined Space Wakanda in 2015, which I think will be a conversation that I'll have one day about other men holding each other accountable for, their toxic masculinity and building safe relationships and safe environments for us as men to express our feelings and, watch each other's growth and support each other in ways that I think go unnoticed and aren't as appreciated of, supporting, your friends when they're going through breakups and supporting them and, helping them, giving them advice and keeping them accountable in their relationships and wanting to see them thrive as men and, wanting to see them be their very best. So I think that may be a conversation I have one day as far as men holding each other accountable and working towards breaking down toxic masculinity and how we as men interact with each other and how we as men interact with the women around us. But for today, I want to talk about my main purpose for doing this podcast. And more than anything, I want to talk about the main purpose for why I do what I do. So, as I discussed last week, I am a certified mental health therapist who works with children and adolescents. Currently, a large portion, pretty much 2/3 of my caseload right now, I'm carrying about 11 kids right now on my caseload, and 7 of which are African American. 6 boys, 1 girl, and I'll actually be ending services with the young lady that I've been working with, who I've made exceptional progress with, and I'm very proud of her for the progress that she's made. But I want to talk today about why I do what I do and why it's important for we as African Americans to seek out mental health resources, why it is absolutely a great idea and why it's absolutely almost a necessity that we seek out mental health. So I have an article here from mentalhealthamerica.net, which talks about vital statistics about the African American community as far as mental health goes. So, of course, just raw statistics when it comes to population size. We know we're 13% of the population. About 45.7% people in the United States identify as Black African American. Another 2% identify as multiracial. And we represent roughly 13% of the population, where in 2010 it said we were about 12.6. In 2014, we were 13.2. So when we talk about Black mental health, we always have to kind of start at the root of where our issues kind of began as far as mental health goes and how those issues still play out in us as current day African Americans. So, of course, we know that historical adversity, starting with the Atlantic slave trade and the traumatic events of those times that have largely affected us even to this day. When we look at things like Jim Crow, sharecropping, segregation, the civil rights movement, those things have had a dramatic impact on us as a culture, how we see ourselves, how we see white culture in general view us, um, trauma and anxiety that we feel sometimes in white spaces. Um, Also, one of the big things that has continuously impacted us as a culture and society as a whole, and in large part has contributed to struggles with our mental health, has been socioeconomic status. When we look at socioeconomic status in general, not just in the African American community, and I see this especially in the work that I do. Um, I work for a company that is Medicaid funded. So there are income restrictions, of course, for eligibility for Medicaid. And I see that in a lot of the homes that I work with where the families are working poor, impoverished in some cases. I worked with a lot of children who are in foster care, which has its own set of issues. I think that may be a podcast episode I may do as well, is working with kids in foster care and some of the things that I've seen with those kids. But socioeconomic status is linked negatively to mental health, or positively, I think, in mental health. Usually, the higher the income, the less likelihood of severe mental health issues, especially because people with higher income typically have better access to mental health and primary care physicians due to having, of course, better insurance, more disposable income to actually seek out treatment, and more treatment options. People who have lesser income, who are impoverished, deal with homelessness, incarceration, substance abuse, which leads them to be more likely to have poor mental health. Also, people who are poor, especially when it comes to African Americans, when we look at a history of housing segregation, we look at poor neighborhoods, which leads to more crime, which leads to more mental health issues. When you see kids dealing with traumatic environments and toxic environments in the neighborhoods that they grow in, also leads to issues when they become adults. Other things we look at are, of course, negative stereotypes that African Americans deal with, that also contribute to mental health issues, as well as, you still see this to this day, some mistrust of authority figures and mistrust of medical care. Definitely see this in black men. The outright stubbornness, I think, at times that we as black men have about going to the doctor and getting treatment and going to treatment or taking care of yourselves. I myself am actually bad at this. I had a situation a few years ago where my blood pressure was out of control, and I just would chalk it up to, oh, it's just a headache. I'll just go take some Tylenol, lay down, take a nap, I'll be good. Not knowing that, anytime I'd go get my blood pressure checked, I'd be nervous because I'm like, I don't want to take medication. I don't want my blood pressure to be up. So, of course, that naturally would inherently make me anxious, and my blood pressure would go up even more. But eventually, I finally resolved to the idea that I have to do something about this because these headaches are killing me. So I decided to finally get a primary care physician and go to the doctor, and was prescribed blood pressure medication, which is only one pill that I take every day, and it's not a very strong dose. And I've been able to very easily manage my blood pressure for the past 4 years. Headaches have drastically diminished. I feel better throughout the day. I mean, I still could benefit from losing a few pounds, but that's a hurdle I'm gonna have to cross at some point. So, stats that are very, very startling for me when I see this, especially as I work with kids, because a lot of issues that African Americans often report in therapy stem from childhood. So, adult black African Americans are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than adult white people. Um, Black African Americans living below the poverty line are 3 times more likely to report psychological distress. African Americans are more likely to have feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness than adult whites, which those feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, worthlessness stem from a lot of different sources, whether that being incarceration of parents, drug use in the home, domestic violence, poor schools, education, poor neighborhoods, death in the family, abuse, neglect. All these things factor into that. And as we see with the stats and in general, when there are lower socioeconomic resources, when there are lower mental health resources, when there are lower physical health primary care resources, you're going to see these numbers go up because people are not having outlets, they're not gaining access to treatment, and essentially a lot of people are walking through life continuously holding in traumatic experiences that they never are able to release. I'm seeing that in some of the kids that I'm working with, especially some of the black boys that I'm working with. Of the 6 black boys I'm working with, I think all of them but one are not living with their biological parent. I have three that are currently in CPS custody, 2 more that are placed with other family members who have adopted them, and 1 who lives with his biological mother, and she's a single parent. And I am seeing a variety of mental health issues with these kids, from severe mood disorders, depression, ADHD, anxiety, trichotillomania, where my kid likes to pull his eyelashes. I'm seeing so many different things, and like their experiences are very different, and yet there are some common themes that are there, where it's a parent who has mental health issues or drug use or abuse or neglect, or just, it's hard. It's very hard to hear some of my kids' stories sometimes. While African Americans are less likely than white people to die from suicide as teenagers, African American teenagers are more likely to attempt suicide more often than white teenagers, which I'm actually startled about that. I'm not shocked so much about actually dying from suicide. I do think especially white males, from my experience in school, are more likely to use aggressive means, such as weapons, to commit suicide. I remember reading stats like that whenever I was in college, where white males were more likely to have fewer suicide attempts, but were more likely to die from suicide because they used things like, weapons as violent means to end their lives, as opposed to drug overdoses or self-mutilation that other demographics may actually use as a means of suicide. African Americans of all ages are more likely to be victims of serious violent crime than non-Hispanic whites, making them more likely to meet domestic criteria for PTSD. And I have definitely seen that with my kids. I have seen that with some of my kids, especially my black boys that I have on my caseload, or a couple of them. are kind of coming to terms with some of the experiences that they dealt with their parents, that they were like, this is normal. This is my normal. This is what my life is. It's normal. Despite how chaotic it is, I don't really know that it is, but this is normal. And I'm working with them, and I'm seeing them slowly but surely open up and talk about things that they may not have ever mentioned to anybody else before. It's scary in a way. It's very sad in a lot of regards that these kids are breaking down these walls that they have, and that they're finally opening up about. It's hard to hear. It's very hard to hear, but I'm thankful that for each and every one of them that they have those moments where they break those walls down and they're able to open up and say, hey, this is what I've seen. This is what I've heard. This is what happened. And there's still, for one or two of them, there's still the hurdle of, realizing that their parent and the environment that they grew up in was not healthy, but actually coming to terms with that. There is a huge gap between acknowledging it and actually coming to terms with it and being able to move forward from it. And I know I think a couple of kids in particular, where one especially, where he is very much in denial about what he's experienced, but he knows that it's probably not healthy what he's seen. So we'll talk more about some of the barriers that we have, starting with stigma about going to mental health. Hey guys, here's the thing. I'm not going to put names and faces to the things that you say to me in therapy. Okay? Unless you are in the commission of a crime, what you've experienced, unless you're in the commission of a crime or you are a danger to yourself or other people, what you have experienced as an individual, it is okay to open up and talk about. I promise you that. Fellas, especially for you guys, I had this conversation with my cousin the other day. It is perfectly okay to go to therapy. It's perfectly okay. I know for a lot of us, therapy seems antithetical to how we were raised, especially growing up in the church, just like myself. It's good to talk to the pastor, and your pastor will probably talk you through some of the current pressing issues you have going on right now. But your pastor may not know that sometimes you got to dig deeper into your past and the trauma that you may have experienced at a younger age that is still causing you issues now, that is still causing you to have very unhealthy coping patterns or very unhealthy relationship patterns because you're used to chaos, or, where you don't have personal boundaries because maybe someone violated your boundaries and you were taught that boundaries don't matter because people are going to kind of step all over them. A pastor's a good resource to, pray with you and help you kind of discuss what's going on with you right now. But a mental health professional like me may help you grasp a better idea of what you've been through, allowing you to kind of work through it, process it, and try to help build new coping skills now so that you can heal from what you've experienced and be able to move forward in a more healthy way. We have a stigma when it comes to being open and honest, seeking help, building coping strategies outside of things like church and prayer, or substance use. Um, the article says, generally speaking, participants in the study were not very open to acknowledging psychological problems. I have run into issues with some of my kids, and I will say that I think, and I talked to actually one of my parents not that long ago about this. One of my kids has been in therapy for several years, and he started opening up to me about some of his experience. And I mentioned it to the dad, is saying, maybe he needed a black male therapist. I'm the first one that he's had, especially, and I'm actually even the first black therapist that he's had. And he seems to have a genuinely good connection with me, and he seems to trust me. So I think, especially, it's funny for me as a mental health therapist. It's funny doing this podcast that I talk about kind of my experience as a person and as a therapist. I have noticed that, and I think it speaks more so to the cultural, being black and blackness having its own, culture that is very much defined in so many different ways, and so many different things, whether it's our music or our shared lineage, or our movies, our pop culture references, our the people that we look up to as black role models, as black success stories. I think it speaks volumes that those are things that I can use in therapy sessions with my kids, especially my black kids, that often comes out as part of my personality, that allows me to be able to build rapport with them and allows them to kind of break their walls down a bit. My kid that I mentioned about me being his first black therapist, I asked him, what was so different that he was actually opening up and talking about the trauma he experienced living with his biological mom. And I was like, what's different between me and the other therapists that you've seen and you've talked to? And he looked at me, and he looked up at my hair, and he looked at me, and he's like, it's your hair. And I was like, oh, so I'm black. And he's like, yeah, it's because you're black. I'm like, okay. I've actually had a conversation with my teammate Winston today, another one of my kids that I just actually started working with. He was like, yeah, he likes you. I'm like, yeah, I can tell. I definitely can tell. He's not trying hard to hide it, but like in how he talks to me and how he interacts with me, I can very much tell that he's very comfortable with me. So I don't take those for granted, and I try to take those opportunities to build more and more, with my kids, whether that's wearing my lapel pins and, talking to them about the music that I listened to growing up, whether that's Prince or Outkast or, even now as I listen to Kendrick as I'm older, or, Childish Gambino or Anderson .Paak, sharing those things with them and, imparting like, I'm not like super cool, but yeah, why don't you check out Outkast? I know y'all listen to y'all little music nowadays. Like, check out Outkast. Like, you wouldn't have the music that you have today without people like Outkast. So, back to the article here. It says that about 30% of the participants reported having a mental illness or receiving treatment for a mental illness. Black men in particular are concerned about stigma, and oh buddy, I'm going to do a few different conversations with us about toxic masculinity and how it absolutely bars us from growing as healthy, fully formed men. And a large part of that stigma that black men face is therapy is weak. Therapy is for the weak. Man. Yeah, we can definitely talk about toxic masculinity one of these days, guys. Um, I think I told a kid of mine, a young black boy one day, is the strong man and the smart man asks for help when he needs it. The weak man hides and doesn't ask for help. You know, if you can't cut your own hair, you go to a barber and he cuts your hair. If you can't fix your car, you call your dad, your uncle, your grandpa, somebody, take it to a mechanic who can fix your car. You get sick and you can't get yourself well. You don't do the whole Martin episode where Gina tried to cook him the soup and he ain't like the soup and he wanted his mama soup. And he's like, call my mama over here and help her, make her come make the soup for me. You probably shouldn't do that, guys. You should probably go to the doctor. And the same thing with mental health. We're not going to hurt you. We're definitely not going to make fun of you. Some of us, like myself, have gone to treatment before. Some of us, like myself, probably should have went to treatment long before they did. I've seen a therapist twice in my life. Once for marriage counseling, once for individual counseling after my marriage ended. I probably should have gone to a therapist probably when I was in college. Definitely should have went and saw a therapist probably after my ex-wife got sick and got better, because I was absolutely overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed and I was mentally and emotionally fatigued. And there was a lot going on at that time. And I told my ex-wife this a few years ago, that I never really fully mentally and emotionally recovered from the time she got sick, pretty much until the time we got divorced. I never really fully recovered, because so much had just kind of been taken out of me in that time period. It's just, I never really fully recovered. And I should have gone to therapy. I didn't exactly cope in the best of ways, but I should have gone to therapy. So the article brings up next about overrepresentation of African Americans in jails and prisons. So the program that I work for at Canopy, the MyPack program, is Mississippi Youth Program Around the Clock. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. I don't ever really look at the abbreviation of it a lot. I just always type in MyPack on my notes and stuff. But MyPack is designed as a service that basically provides services for the kids in their homes in an effort to keep them out of youth detention, long-term residential facilities, long-term hospitals, that sort. It's an effort to provide therapy in the home and to provide equivalent services that the kids would probably receive in a residential facility or a mental health hospital while at home. So I'm seeing the kids usually 1 to 2 times a week, providing therapy for them. My struggle sometimes with providing services for my kids is the struggle of getting them to buy in and knowing that, yeah, you have done some bad things, you've misbehaved, you've probably said some things that got you into trouble, or you said some things that got people's attention, that you were suicidal, or you're going to hurt somebody else, or that you were hearing voices or things like that. So for a lot of my kids, they struggle with the idea that I got in trouble, therefore I have these people coming to my home and talking to me. Where my stance is, for a lot of them that I try to talk to them, is, letting them know and understand that ultimately my job is to help you out as much as you can, to talk to you about where you're struggling, and really and truthfully, I am a means to help you prevent some of the things that may happen to you down the road. I'm not a police officer. I don't work for Child Protective Services. I'm somebody who can, put you up on game and ultimately try to help you heal from the things that you're hurting from, that you're not able to put into words, that you're not even able to maybe even recognize, to help you move forward without having to go through the legal system. There are a few cases where the kid is court committed to MyPac because of a criminal offense that they might have engaged in. But ultimately, I very much talk to my kids as therapy's not punishment. Therapy's not punishment for the things that you did wrong. Therapy is a place where you can learn, where you can grow, where you can make amends, where you can heal, and not a punishment. So that is one thing that I do notice that I have to kind of work through with some of my kids is some of them are reluctant to say or talk about what they've experienced, what they've gone through, because ultimately they feel like this is punitive and not so much seen as something that's helpful. So that's kind of been my fight, and that's one of the things that I definitely want to constantly encourage my kids, that I'm here to help and I'm not here as a punishment. So we're going to continue with an article that I found here from Talkspace. And apparently I did not highlight the header for it. So let me find it. Here it goes. This is written by Talkspace therapist, who is an African-American male. Why black men face greater mental health challenges. So let me get back to here. I like working off my iPad doing this because I got this little highlighter thing where I highlight where the talking points I want to mention in the article, and as I'm recording, and I can flip back and forth and stuff. This is great. I should probably edit this out, but I'm not. So many black men have. Okay, so this is definitely why I'm doing this podcast, fellas. And I tell my kids this all the time. My young boys all the time, especially. There's going to come a point where you're going to want to date, where you're going to be interested in some young girl or a guy. Never know. I've worked with children of almost every demographic so far. Almost. I haven't had any Asian kids yet. Latino, African American, white, straight, bi, trans. It's been interesting. The different demographics I've gotten a chance to work with in the past year and a half. But this goes for almost anybody, especially for you guys, for you fellas out here. I think I even am guilty of this, where we don't know how to actually talk about our emotional experiences. We have a very strong tendency in relationships and friendships that when we are faced with feelings of anger or resentment or isolation or anxiety, depression, instead of actually opening up and saying, I'm sad, or I am afraid, or, I'm really, really anxious about this thing that I have coming up, or I'm very anxious about, saying how I feel to this woman, instead of being able to be open and honest and say those things and discuss those things, we shut down. We tend to shut down quite often. Or the absolute worst thing, and I teach and I talk to my young boys about this constantly. Um, we act in violence. You know, when you're 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old and you get into a disagreement with somebody at school, violence seems like the reasonable way to handle your problem. I'm gonna get mad, and then I'm gonna flip out, and then I'm gonna hit them. You know, whether that problem is maybe you stepped on my toe, or you said something I didn't like, or something I've definitely noticed. I don't know how to do my work. I'm very confused about what's going on in class, so I'm just gonna act out and use that as a way to escape the situation as opposed to trying to figure it out. That is a very unhealthy coping strategy at a very young age. And when those strategies are not worked on at that age, it turns into violence when you become older. So my aim with my kids is working to build strategies outside of anger, talking, writing, self-reflection, being open and honest, you know, breaking down the notion of I'm a punk or I'm weak if I walk away or if I say what I'm feeling, you know, working with young boys at a young age to try to break down the toxic things that they're being taught as young men, that we don't talk about our problems. Many men struggle with the idea of being vulnerable and sharing their emotions. And I'm definitely going to do an episode about the power of vulnerability. What was it, Brene Brown? Like, she did a TED Talk, and I definitely want to watch it and kind of break it down. And I think one of the most glowing compliments I think I've ever gotten from somebody is that I found a way to use vulnerability as a strength. Like, I definitely don't think I did that intentionally. I think that started with my struggles with self-esteem and being very self-aware of my struggle with my self-esteem. I think it kind of gradually grew into a place of strength because I became very honest with who I was as a person, and I got to a point where I became very comfortable with the idea of, yeah, I'm not this like super masculine guy, dude. Like, you know, I'm very much gonna talk about how I feel and try to figure out what's wrong with me or what's wrong with how I'm seeing the situation, stuff like that. So article continues and says, for those who grew up as sensitive boys, they are often subject to ridicule and shaming for what is natural. Oh, yes. We're not robots, guys. We're not robots. Okay? Crying, sadness, isolation, feelings of abandonment, especially when a parent is not involved in your life. Shame, guilt, anxiety, excitement, pleasure. These are normal, natural emotions. They're not feminine emotions. Okay? You're not a robot. You feel stuff too. Women are not the emotional creatures. You guys are just as emotional. And if we were more willing to tap into emotions other than anger, or seeing those emotions other than anger as natural and normal expressions of human beings, and not seeing them things like guilt or shame or self-doubt, insecurity, not seeing those as female or feminine emotions, we would work to be more healthier individuals, because we'd be more honest with ourselves and more honest with the people around us about how we feel, what's going on with us. Because we have feelings. Often or not, more times than not, especially generations like mine and the generations before, we were never taught to tap into those emotions and see them and express them as normal things. You know, we were often told to be strong and firm and, you know, not really show weakness. We have to get away from those things if we want our young men to grow to be healthy individuals. If we want to see ourselves continue to grow to be healthy individuals, we have to get away from those things, from those ideals that, you know, you're weak to show emotion or you're weak to show vulnerability. Black men face a unique challenge in that most of what is prized about them may be their looks or their bodies, but rarely ever their intellect or their emotional intelligence. It cannot be understated how vital emotional intelligence is in healthy relationships, especially healthy romantic relationships. I think I'm probably gonna look up things and talk about emotional weight and emotional baggage that we as men often put on our romantic partners, which is very unfair in relationships. Emotional intelligence and even smarts. We're doing a better job of not seeing intelligence as something that is soft or weak, you know. But we do still need to continue to improve on seeing emotional intelligence as something that is vital and necessary for young black boys and black men, that as we grow older and we develop relationships, whether that is relationships romantically or work or friendships, that emotional intelligence of being in tune with who you are, how you feel, you know, being able to express those things are vastly important. The author goes on to mention artists that are open and honest about their mental health struggles, and I'll do a whole episode about that, about mental health as we see in celebrity, in black celebrity, especially black male celebrity, whether that be, you know, Kid Cudi or Kendrick Lamar, folks like Meta World Peace. Despite how crazy Ron Artest is, he has a very interesting story when it comes to mental health. Brandon Marshall. I want to do a podcast about that, about how they're working to break down stigmas of mental health, and as, you know, famous athletes and artists that are openly talking about their feelings of depression and other mental health issues. Another thing that we look at as far as roadblocks for African American males are unrealistic expectations based on gender and race that often keep many black people, or black men and men of men of color, out of therapy. The stereotype the stereotype is that men don't even like to ask for directions. Hey man, look, I got a GPS on my phone. I use that thing. Now, I have a photographic memory, so after I drive to your home a couple times to come provide services to your house, I remember how to get there, so I'm not going to plug it into the GPS. My brain is weird, guys. Like, I could tell you how to get to my Nana's house from here to Houston without looking at a map, without plugging in the GPS, like clockwork, because I've been making that drive with my parents for 25 years. Don't ask me why my brain works like this. Excuse me. So he also adds this the article, the author of the article. I probably should have said that first. Jorel Carabello, is a Talkspace therapist. I like that. I like this article. It's a lot of good talking points here. circular problem we experience. In order for black men to get help, they must be open to let someone know that they need help. But in order to open up and ask, they have to crack the cool facade. Bell Hooks talked about that in her work, that black men have to break down that facade of I'm too cool to ask for help. So that's where I come in as a therapist working with young boys. You know, there are different things that my kids have done in order to get to me as far as therapy goes. But I like the idea that as a black male and a black male therapist, that I can kind of break that facade of being cool. For one, I never thought I was really that cool. I'm a nerd. I admit it. But they may say I'm cool. They may think I'm cool. I mean, I got the hair. You know, I dress decently. I have my lapel pin. Sometimes I wear my novelty shirts to work. Like I wore my show enough shirt to work today and saw one of my kids. I have an era of cool to the kids that I might not have had when I was younger. But as a grown man, I can kind of play it off a bit. But I get to be in a position where I can kind of try to break down those walls to let the kids know that you can be vulnerable, you can talk to me, and it helps that I look like you. There's something about me and there's something in me that you can relate to. And I know for some of my kids that feels really, really good. Oddly enough, the article here mentions the treatment of black women and the historical experience like that black women have gone through, that black men must be aware of and allow us in their hearts and minds. And I think I would love to look up stats of African American males, LCSWs, LPCs, like in Mississippi. I don't know if that data is available. I wonder how limited that is, especially like in the Delta. I definitely wonder what the demographics are for LCSWs of black men in Mississippi, because I think it would definitely be beneficial, especially in areas like the Delta where there are a higher concentration of African Americans. Here on the coast, places like Jackson and Hattiesburg, especially Hattiesburg, where white flight is like hitting very hard, and young black kids are being left in Hattiesburg public schools where the school district is not performing well. So there's definitely going to be a need there in that area. And I mean, it's a place that I lived in and I moved away. The mental health resources were not as strong there as they probably need to be, which is another issue I could definitely talk about one day, is community mental health. But I think being in a position where, as a black mental health professional, I can draw from cultural experiences and cultural touchstones, stuff like Get Out, where I can use the sunken place to describe subconscious thought, or I can use rap lyrics like the intro and outro of this song of the show, Outkast in Due Time, where I quote, yes, he's problematic, I know that he is. CeeLo's verse where, he's talking about, maintaining his faith in God and, helping him push forward. It's one of my favorite Outkast songs, and I always drew inspiration from that song. Using Kendrick, all right, as a mantra for my kids in therapy, or I don't know, it's crazy. Like, I like being in a position where I can help my young black boys, in treatment. And, I'm kind of happy that I'm in a position where my caseload is heavy with black boys, because I definitely want to be somebody that they can see that he looks like me and I think he can help. And I want to provide that for them to kind of break down some of the walls and the stereotypes and the stigma that we talked about in this episode. So, to wrap up for the day, we talked about stigmas that African Americans face and seeking mental health treatment. We talked about historical and current day stressors, trauma, experiences that contribute to Black mental health issues. Where we also talked about we as African Americans are more likely to endorse mental health issues or mental health diagnoses than our white counterparts, largely due to historical stress, socioeconomic stress, substance abuse, incarceration, lack of education access. These things all add up and all contribute to where we struggle with our mental health. Also, we talked about stigma, and for Black men, breaking down that cool factor. I'm hip, I'm cool. I gotta keep my rep up with the squad. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't let them see me weak. But then we go home and we're an absolute monster because we hold all this stuff in. So let's not be so wrapped up in the idea that I gotta constantly be cool when we're constantly holding in a lot of aggression and anger and sadness that we need to work on letting go of. So that is all we have here from the Captain's Couch. I recorded this really late in the evening because I took a nap and I'm not tired yet. So I wanted to go ahead and get this off my heart and my mind and put it on wax. So thank y'all for listening. When the podcast is up on Apple Podcasts, which I think that's coming soon, subscribe, drop a rating for your boy. We made it to Stitcher, we made it to Google Podcasts, we made it to Breaker, Pocket Podcasts, Radio Public. Is it Radio Public? I don't know. I put the links out on Facebook and on Twitter. I made separate Facebook and Twitter pages and accounts for the podcast. We are making the podcast rounds. I think Google Podcasts, we definitely made it there. I'm still waiting to hear back on Apple Podcasts, but I have the RSS feed. If you want the RSS feed, I can drop it on social media, and y'all can pick that up. Plug it into your Apple Podcasts and listen to the podcast that way until we're officially on Apple Podcasts. Spotify, I'll let y'all know if we make it to Spotify, and then I might do a happy dance in my living room, my office, if that happens. But yeah, look forward to talking to y'all. I said 2 weeks, but I think maybe I'm gonna do this every week. So, as I have a lot to talk about, and I do enjoy talking. So, hopefully we'll see you guys next week. And until then, peace.
Congregation, will you turn your text to the book about caste? Chapter 2, verse 1. The first one that feel me. Jump up and make a joyful noise. Use outcasted. Meaning, now you have a choice like that.
Don't like temptation. You've been where you